I should have known something was wrong when Marcus missed his Tuesday morning coffee at the Flying J in Green River. My name is Ray Castellanos, and I've been hauling fuel across the western states for 18 years. In this business, you learn to read the signs, weather patterns, road conditions, the subtle shift in a dispatcher's voice that means trouble. But the most important thing you learn is routine. Drivers like Marcus Delacroix don't break routine. Not after 22 years on the road. Not when they're 3 months from retirement and talking about the fishing cabin they're going to buy in Montana. Marcus and I had been running parallel routes through Utah for the better part of a decade. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, we'd grab coffee at mile marker 112 on Interstate 70. He'd complain about his dispatcher, I'd complain about fuel prices, and we'd part ways him heading south on Highway 191 toward the Navajo Reservation, me continuing east to Denver. Simple as that. Except this Tuesday, his usual spot at the counter stayed empty. Betty, the waitress who'd been serving us both for years, kept glancing at the door with that worried expression people get when something familiar goes missing. "You heard from Marcus lately?" she asked, refilling my cup for the third time. I hadn't. That should have been my first warning. The call came 2 days later, while I was unloading in Albuquerque. Marcus's dispatcher, a gruff man named Peterson who rarely showed emotion, sounded shaken. "Ray, they found Marcus's truck. Empty. Down in Desolation Canyon. About 20 miles south of Green River." "What do you mean, empty?" "I mean empty. No Marcus, no cargo. 8,000 gallons of diesel. Just gone." I finished my delivery and drove straight up to Utah. Something cold settling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Desolation Canyon earned its name honestly. A jagged slash through red rock country where cell towers don't reach, and the only traffic comes from truckers taking the shortcut to the reservation. It's the kind of place where you can drive for hours without seeing another soul. The Utah Highway Patrol had Marcus's truck impounded at a lot in Moab, but they let me take a look since I was listed as his emergency contact. Walking around that familiar blue Peterbilt felt like viewing a body. The cab looked normal enough. Marcus's coffee-stained logbook still open to his last entry. His CB radio still tuned to Channel 19. The St. Christopher medal his daughter gave him, still hanging from the rearview mirror. But the tanker told a different story. I'd hauled fuel long enough to recognize professional work when I saw it. The cargo tank had been drilled with surgical precision, 3 holes, perfectly aligned, each no bigger than a quarter. No scorching, no torn metal, no sign of the usual brute force methods thieves use to crack a tanker. This was clean, calculated, and completely silent. The kind of work that takes specialized equipment and knowledge of exactly where to drill to avoid the internal baffles. "Hell of a thing," said Deputy Morrison, the investigating officer. He was young, maybe 30, with the eager intensity of someone still new enough to care deeply about every case. 23 years I've been working vehicle theft. Never seen anything like it. Takes hours to drain a tank that size, and they did it without leaving a single tire track or footprint. "What about Marcus?" Morrison's expression darkened. "That's the strange part. No signs of struggle in the cab. No blood, no indication of violence. It's like he just got out and walked away." But I knew Marcus. He wouldn't abandon his truck. Not for anything. Not for money. Not for threats. Not even with a gun to his head. That truck represented his livelihood, his identity, his connection to a world that made sense. Marcus leaving his truck would be like a priest abandoning his altar. Over the next few days, I started making calls. Truckers talk, and word travels fast on the CB channels. What I learned made my skin crawl. Marcus wasn't the first. 3 months earlier, a driver named Janet Kowalski had vanished near Blanding, her tanker found drained in similar circumstances. 6 weeks before that, Tom Bradley disappeared hauling chemicals through Monument Valley. His truck discovered with the same precise drilling pattern. All experienced drivers. All isolated routes. All cargo gone without a trace. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Someone was hunting fuel haulers in the remote corners of southeastern Utah, using methods that suggested intimate knowledge of tanker construction and trucking routes. But the question that kept me awake at night was simpler and more terrifying. What were they doing with the drivers? I decided to run Marcus's route myself. Looking back, I realize how stupid that was. But grief and anger don't make for good decision-making, and I needed to understand what had happened to my friend. I borrowed a company tanker, filed a route plan that roughly matched Marcus's last known movements, and headed south from Green River as the sun set behind the canyon walls. Highway 191 cuts through some of the most isolated country in the continental United States. Once you leave the interstate, it's just you, the asphalt, and endless miles of red rock desert. The kind of landscape that swallows sound and makes you feel like the last person on Earth. I was about 20 miles south of town, approaching mile marker 187, when I saw the other truck. At first, it was just headlights in my mirrors, following at a reasonable distance. Nothing unusual about that. Truckers often convoy through remote areas for safety and companionship. But as the miles passed, I noticed the other driver maintaining exactly the same spacing, matching my speed changes with uncanny precision. When I slowed down, he slowed down. When I sped up, he sped up. When I tried to raise him on the CB, I got nothing but static. That's when I saw the emergency flashers ahead. A truck had pulled over at a scenic overlook, hazard lights blinking in the darkness. As I got closer, I could make out the silhouette of someone standing beside the cab, waving a flashlight in the universal signal for help. Every instinct I'd developed in 18 years of driving told me to stop. Truckers help truckers. It's an unwritten law of the road. But something felt wrong. The truck's positioning was too perfect, blocking the easiest escape route from the overlook. The person with the flashlight moved with too much purpose, too much confidence for someone genuinely in distress. And the truck that had been following me had vanished from my mirrors the moment I'd spotted the breakdown ahead. I keyed my CB radio. Breaker 19. This is Desert Rat eastbound on 191 at mile marker 187. Got a driver requesting assistance. Anyone else in the area? Static. Then, faintly, a voice I recognized. Ray? Ray? Is that you? My blood turned to ice water. It was Marcus's voice, but wrong somehow. Hollow. Like it was coming from somewhere very far away. Marcus? Where are you, buddy? Don't stop, Ray. Whatever you do, don't stop. They're not. The transmission cut to static. I hit the accelerator and blew past the breakdown, catching a glimpse of the figure with the flashlight as I passed. In that brief moment, illuminated by my headlights, I saw something that still haunts my dreams. The person looked exactly like Marcus, same build, same jacket, same way of standing. But the face was wrong. Empty. Like looking at a photograph of someone you love after they've died. In my side mirror, I watched the broken-down truck pull back onto the highway and begin following me again, joined now by two other vehicles that seemed to materialize from the darkness. They stayed with me for the next 40 miles, never getting closer, never falling back, just maintaining that same eerie formation. Every time I tried the radio, I heard fragments of Marcus's voice, pleading with me to stop, to help him, to just pull over for a minute. But underneath the familiar words was something else, a mechanical quality that made my skin crawl. When I finally reached the truck stop in Blanding, my pursuers melted away into the night as suddenly as they'd appeared. I sat in the parking lot for an hour, shaking, trying to make sense of what I'd experienced. The next morning, I drove back to Desolation Canyon with a Utah Highway Patrol escort. At mile marker 187, we found fresh tire marks in the dirt and 3 perfectly round holes drilled into the asphalt, the same size and spacing as the holes in Marcus's tanker. Deputy Morrison took photographs, collected samples, filed his reports, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't understand what we were dealing with. How could he? How do you explain to someone that there are predators out there who don't just steal cargo and kill drivers, but somehow steal their voices, their faces, their very essence to use as bait for the next victim? That was 6 months ago. Marcus's case remains officially unsolved, filed away with Janet's and Tom's and God knows how many others. I still drive the western routes, but I avoid Highway 191 after dark. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm running empty through lonely country, I hear Marcus's voice on the CB radio, warning other drivers about the friendly faces offering help in the desert darkness. I never answer anymore. I just turn up the volume on my stereo and keep driving, because I've learned that some mysteries are too dangerous to solve, and some friends are better left lost than found in the condition they're in now. The way station that killed Diana Westbrook doesn't exist on any official state highway map, but I've seen it with my own eyes. My name is Officer Sarah Chen, and I've been working commercial vehicle enforcement for the California Highway Patrol for 11 years. I know every way station, inspection facility, and truck checkpoint between Barstow and the Nevada border. I know their operating hours, their equipment specifications, and the names of every inspector who's ever worked them. When you spend your career monitoring the flow of commercial traffic through some of the most desolate stretches of highway in America, you learn to notice when something doesn't belong. The first report came in on a Tuesday morning in October of 2022. Diana Westbrook, an experienced hazmat hauler with Clean Transportation Services, had called in a routine inspection stop at mile marker 47 on Highway 127, just south of the Sema Road Junction in the Mojave National Preserve. Her dispatcher logged the transmission at 11:43 a.m. Unit 77, pulling into scales for inspection, should be back on the road within the hour. She never made her next radio check. When Diana failed to arrive at her scheduled delivery in Las Vegas, her company contacted us. I drove out to mile marker 47 expecting to find a broken down truck, or maybe evidence of an accident. What I found instead was nothing. Empty desert. No way station, no truck, no sign that Diana Westbrook had ever existed. But there were tire tracks in the hard pan. Heavy, deep impressions that could only have been made by a fully loaded chemical tanker. The tracks led off the highway toward a flat area surrounded by Joshua trees, then simply stopped, as if the truck had been lifted straight up into the clear desert sky. My supervisor, Sergeant Rodriguez, was skeptical. Drivers get disoriented in the desert all the time, he said, studying the incident report. She probably called in the wrong mile marker. These hazmat runs are high pressure, long hours, tight schedules. People make mistakes. But I knew Diana's reputation. 14 years hauling dangerous chemicals without a single violation. Safety Award winner 3 years running. The kind of driver who triple-checked her route planning and carried backup GPS units in case of equipment failure. Diana didn't make mistakes about her location. 3 weeks later, we got another call. James Patterson, an independent owner-operator hauling industrial acids, reported the same thing. Mandatory inspection at mile marker 47, estimated delay of 1 hour. This time, I was monitoring commercial radio traffic and heard the transmission myself. CHP unit to all stations. I've got a commercial vehicle calling in an inspection stop at a non-existent facility. I radioed back to dispatch, requesting immediate backup to mile marker 47, Highway 127. I made the drive in 22 minutes, pushing my cruiser hard across the empty desert highway. When I arrived, I found the same thing as before. Nothing. No way station, no truck, no James Patterson, just those same deep tire tracks leading nowhere. But this time, I wasn't alone. As I stood in the desert silence, photographing the tire impressions, I heard the distant sound of air brakes. Looking back toward the highway, I saw a truck, a gleaming white commercial vehicle with official California Department of Transportation markings parked exactly where the tire tracks began. I walked back to investigate, but with each step I took, the truck seemed to recede. Not moving exactly, but becoming somehow less solid, less present. Like trying to focus on something at the edge of your vision that disappears the moment you look directly at it. When I reached the highway, there was nothing there. That night, I started going through missing person reports from the past 2 years, cross-referencing them with commercial vehicle incidents in southeastern California. What I found made my hands shake as I typed 7 drivers, all experienced hazmat haulers. All disappeared after reporting mandatory inspections at mile marker 47 on Highway 127, all during daylight hours when no legitimate weigh station should have been operating in that location. The pattern went back 18 months, with disappearances occurring roughly every 10 to 12 weeks. Always the same radio transmission, always the same location, always the same result: drivers and their dangerous cargo vanishing without explanation. I brought my findings to Sergeant Rodriguez, but he remained unconvinced. Look, Chen, I know you want to find these people, but you're chasing ghosts. Maybe there's a hijacking operation targeting hazmat loads, but phantom weigh stations? Come on. So I decided to see for myself. The next Thursday, I positioned my patrol unit in concealment about a mile north of mile marker 47 and waited. For 6 hours, I watched empty highways shimmer in the desert heat. Commercial traffic was light, maybe 1 truck every 20 minutes, most of them passing without incident. Then, at 2:15 in the afternoon, I saw something that defied explanation. A truck was approaching from the north, a blue Kenworth hauling what looked like a chemical tanker. As it neared mile marker 47, I saw the driver begin to slow down and signal for a right turn. But there was nothing to turn into, just empty desert. Except there wasn't. As I watched through binoculars, a building seemed to materialize beside the highway. Not suddenly, like a magic trick, but gradually, the way objects emerge from fog. First, just a suggestion of straight lines and artificial geometry against the organic curves of the desert landscape. Then concrete barriers, electronic scales, and finally a complete weigh station facility that looked exactly like every other DOT inspection point I'd ever seen. The truck pulled in, and I could see a figure in uniform walking out to meet the driver. Everything looked perfectly normal, perfectly legitimate. If I hadn't been watching the empty desert moments before, I would have assumed the facility had always been there. I started my engine and drove toward the scene. But by the time I covered the mile between my position and mile marker 47, the weigh station was gone again. No truck, no inspector, no building. Just tire tracks in the sand and the lingering smell of diesel exhaust hanging in the still air. That evening, I called the Motor Carrier Division and confirmed what I already suspected. No inspection had been scheduled for that location. No inspector had been dispatched to mile marker 47. And no record existed of the blue Kenworth that had pulled into a facility that shouldn't exist. But I had seen it. I had watched a weigh station appear from nothing, swallow a truck and driver, then vanish back into the desert heat like a mirage made solid. Over the following weeks, I tried everything. I installed trail cameras, hoping to capture video evidence. The cameras malfunctioned, showing only static or completely blank footage during the times when the disappearances occurred. I brought other officers to witness the phenomenon, but the phantom weigh station never appeared when I wasn't alone. The last sighting was 3 months ago. Another hazmat driver, another routine inspection call, another truck that vanished into the desert. But this time I got there fast enough to see something that still wakes me up at night. As the phantom weigh station faded back into nothing, I caught a glimpse through its dissolving walls. Inside, I saw them, all the missing drivers, standing in perfect formation beside their trucks, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. Diana Westbrook was there, and James Patterson, and 5 others whose names I'd memorized from missing person reports. They were all still at their posts, eternally waiting for an inspection that would never end. I don't patrol that section of Highway 127 anymore. Officially, I requested reassignment due to equipment reliability issues in the desert heat. Unofficially, I couldn't bear the thought of watching another driver disappear into that impossible place. Sometimes, late at night when I'm monitoring radio traffic, I still hear the transmissions. Unit pulling into scales for inspection at mile marker 47. And I know that somewhere in the Mojave Desert, a way station is materializing out of nothing, ready to process another load of human cargo that will never reach its destination. The coffee pot I used to kill Raymond Mitchell still sits on the same burner where I left it that Tuesday morning. My name is Linda Vasquez, and I've been serving coffee and comfort food to long-haul truckers at the Desert Rose Diner for 16 years. Mile marker 233 on Interstate 40, right at the edge of the painted desert, where Arizona stretches out like God's own canvas in shades of red and gold. It's the kind of place where drivers know they can get a decent meal, clean restrooms, and coffee strong enough to keep them alert through the long Nevada night ahead. I know my regulars by their orders, their routes, and their stories. Jimmy Torres always wants his eggs over easy with wheat toast. Sandra Kim takes her coffee black with exactly 2 sugars. And Raymond Mitchell, sweet, soft-spoken Raymond, who'd been driving tanker trucks for 19 years, always ordered the same thing every Tuesday at 6:15 p.m. Coffee with cream, no sugar, and whatever pie we had fresh that day. Raymond was the kind of customer who made the job worthwhile. Polite, generous with tips, always asked about my grandson's baseball games. He'd been stopping at the Desert Rose every Tuesday for the better part of 3 years, part of his weekly run hauling fuel from the refinery in Texas to distribution centers in California. Clockwork reliable, just like his order. That Tuesday started like any other. The dinner rush was winding down, and I was wiping tables when I saw Raymond's familiar blue and white Peterbilt pulling into the truck parking area out back. He looked tired, more tired than usual, but he smiled when he saw me and took his regular spot at the counter. The usual, Raymond? You know it, Linda. And please tell me, you've got some of that apple pie left. I poured his coffee from the pot I always used for the evening shift, added cream the way he liked it, and cut him a generous slice of pie. We chatted about his daughter's upcoming wedding while he ate, and he seemed in good spirits despite the exhaustion I could see around his eyes. Getting too old for these long hauls, he said with a chuckle, finishing the last of his coffee. Maybe it's time to think about a local route. Stay closer to home. Those were the last words Raymond Mitchell ever spoke to me. The Arizona Highway Patrol found him the next morning in his sleeper cab at the rest area just 5 miles down the road. Natural causes. They initially assumed a heart attack or stroke, the kind of thing that claims too many drivers who spend their lives sitting behind the wheel, living on truck stop food and caffeine. But something bothered me about Raymond's death. He'd seemed tired, yes, but not sick, not like a man whose body was shutting down. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, until Detective Morrison from the Flagstaff Police Department came by the diner 3 days later. I'm investigating Raymond Mitchell's death, he said, settling onto the same stool where Raymond used to sit. The medical examiner found something unusual in his system. Unusual how? Ethylene glycol, antifreeze. Enough to kill him, but not enough to cause immediate symptoms. Someone had been poisoning him slowly, over a period of several weeks. My hands went cold. That's impossible. Raymond was healthy. He came in here every Tuesday, same as always. That's what I'm hoping you can help me understand. According to his logbook, this was his regular stop. If someone was dosing him with antifreeze, it might have happened here. The implication hit me like a physical blow. I'd served Raymond his last meal. I'd poured the coffee that might have contained the poison that killed him. But how? I used the same ingredients for everyone. The same pots, the same procedures I'd followed for 16 years. Detective Morrison spent the next hour going through our routine, taking notes about our suppliers, our staff, our procedures. But I barely heard him. I kept thinking about Raymond's tired eyes, the way he'd seemed to struggle with simple conversation that last Tuesday. Had I missed the signs? Had I unknowingly participated in his murder? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every interaction I'd had with Raymond over the past few months, searching for clues I might have missed. And gradually, I began to notice a pattern. About 2 months earlier, we'd started getting a new customer on Tuesday evenings. A quiet man in his 40s who always sat in the corner booth, ordered black coffee and pie, and paid with exact change. He never spoke beyond placing his order, never made eye contact, just sat there reading trucking magazines and watching the other customers. I'd assumed he was a driver deadheading home or waiting for a load. Truck stops attract all kinds, and silent customers weren't unusual. But now I realized something that made my skin crawl. He always arrived about 10 minutes before Raymond, and he always left shortly after Raymond did. The next Tuesday, the quiet man didn't come in. Neither did Raymond, of course. But somehow I'd been expecting the stranger to show up anyway. When he didn't, I felt a mixture of relief and growing dread. I started paying closer attention to our Tuesday evening routine, going back through credit card receipts and security camera footage from the past few months. What I found confirmed my worst fears. The quiet man had been there every Tuesday for exactly 9 weeks, the same 9 weeks that, according to Detective Morrison, someone had been slowly poisoning Raymond Mitchell. But more disturbing than his presence was his behavior. On the security footage, I could see him watching Raymond with predatory focus. When Raymond went to the restroom, the man's eyes would track his movements. When Raymond paid his check and headed for the door, the man would glance at his watch as if timing something important. But the most chilling detail was something I only noticed on my third viewing of the footage. During Raymond's third week of visits, I could see the quiet man get up from his booth and walk toward the coffee station while Raymond was in the restroom. The camera angle wasn't clear enough to see exactly what he did, but he spent almost 30 seconds near the coffee pots before returning to his seat. The coffee pots, the same pots I used every evening, labeled and organized by blend and caffeine content. The same pot I always used for Raymond's cream coffee, because he was a creature of habit and I wanted to make sure his coffee was always perfect. I realized with growing horror that someone had been using my routine, my consistency, my desire to provide good service as a weapon against Raymond Mitchell. The killer had studied us both, learning that I always used the same pot for Raymond's coffee, that Raymond always came in at the same time, that he always ordered the same thing. All the murderer had to do was poison the right pot and wait. That evening, I did something I'd never done in 16 years of working at the Desert Rose. I threw away every coffee pot, every cream dispenser, every piece of equipment that might have been contaminated. I couldn't bear the thought that traces of poison might still be lingering, waiting to claim another victim. Detective Morrison called the next morning. They'd found antifreeze residue in Raymond's truck, hidden in a bottle of window washer fluid that had been tampered with. But more disturbing, they discovered evidence of similar tampering at truck stops along Raymond's regular route, a methodical poisoning campaign that had taken weeks to plan and execute. "We think we're looking for someone with intimate knowledge of trucking routes and schedules," Morrison told me. "Someone who knew exactly where Raymond would be and when." But I already knew the truth was simpler and more terrifying than that. We weren't looking for someone with special knowledge. We were looking for someone patient enough to sit in a truck stop for 9 consecutive Tuesdays, watching and learning, turning the simple routines of working people into instruments of murder. The quiet man never came back to the Desert Rose. Raymond's regular stool sits empty every Tuesday evening, and I find myself glancing at the corner booth where the killer used to sit, half expecting to see him there with his black coffee and trucking magazines, selecting his next victim. I still work the evening shift, still serve coffee to tired drivers trying to make it through another night on the road. But I use different pots now, change my routines randomly, and I watch the faces of my customers with new eyes, because I've learned that monsters don't always announce themselves with violence and chaos. Sometimes they just sit quietly in corner booths, drinking coffee and learning how to turn kindness into poison. The brake fluid pooled beneath Jennifer Caldwell's Jackknife tanker was still warm when I arrived at the scene, but it should have been ice cold. My name is Detective Kate Morrison, and I've been investigating commercial vehicle accidents for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for 13 years. Highway 25E through Cumberland Gap sees its share of trucking incidents, steep grades, tight curves, and drivers pushing too hard to make their delivery schedules. Most accidents up here follow predictable patterns: weather, equipment failure, or human error. You learn to read the evidence like a story written in twisted metal and skid marks. But Jennifer Caldwell's crash told a different story entirely. The call came in at 4:37 a.m. on a clear October morning in 2023. Single vehicle accident, propane tanker jackknifed on the Kentucky side of the mountain pass. Driver transported to the hospital with minor injuries. Routine enough that I almost didn't respond personally, but something about the dispatcher's tone made me change my mind. "Detective, you might want to see this one yourself," Officer Barnes said when I arrived at the scene. Something's not right about the brake failure. I'd worked with Barnes for 6 years, and he had good instincts. If he thought something was off, it probably was. I pulled on my work gloves and started my preliminary examination of the wreckage. The tanker had jackknifed on a relatively straight section of highway, which was unusual. Most jackknife accidents happen during turns or sudden braking, when the trailer's momentum overcomes the tractor's ability to control it. But Jennifer's truck had simply folded in half on a gentle curve, as if the brakes had failed completely and suddenly. I crawled under the twisted wreckage to examine the brake system, and that's when I found the first anomaly. The brake lines hadn't failed due to wear or pressure; they'd been cut. Clean, precise cuts that had been carefully concealed beneath protective wrapping, designed to fail under pressure but not immediately visible during a routine inspection. "Barnes, call this in as a criminal investigation," I said, backing out from under the truck. Someone sabotaged this vehicle. But as I stood up, wiping brake fluid from my hands, I noticed something else that made my stomach turn. The placard on the side of Jennifer's tanker read, UN 1978, the hazardous materials code for propane. 26,000 gallons of compressed propane, sitting in a jackknife tanker with compromised brake lines, less than 3 miles from the Cumberland Gap Township. If that tanker had ignited during the crash, the explosion would have been visible from space. I spent the next hour documenting the scene, while the hazmat crew worked to safely offload the propane. Jennifer was conscious and coherent when I interviewed her at the hospital, but she couldn't provide much insight into who might have sabotaged her truck. "I stopped for fuel in Corbin around midnight," she told me, her voice still shaky from the accident. "Routine stop. Nothing unusual. Checked my pre-trip inspection items. Everything looked normal." "Did you notice anyone around your truck while you were inside the truck stop?" "Not really. It was pretty quiet. Maybe 1 or 2 other drivers, but nobody paid any attention to me." But someone had paid attention. Someone had known enough about commercial brake systems to sabotage them in a way that would cause catastrophic failure, but not enough about hazardous materials to realize they were creating a potential weapon of mass destruction. I drove to the truck stop in Corbin that evening, hoping to find security camera footage from the previous night. The manager, a tired-looking man named Pete Kowalski, was cooperative but not optimistic. "Cameras have been on the fritz for weeks," he said, leading me to a cramped office behind the main counter. "Half of them don't record, and the ones that do record over themselves every 72 hours. But luck was on my side. One camera, mounted high above the fuel pumps, had captured a partial view of the truck parking area. I spent 2 hours reviewing grainy black and white footage, looking for anything unusual around the time Jennifer would have been fueling. At 12:43 a.m., I found what I was looking for. A figure in dark clothing had approached Jennifer's truck while she was inside paying for fuel. The person moved with purpose, carrying what looked like a small tool bag, and disappeared beneath the trailer for approximately 4 minutes before walking away into the shadows beyond the camera's range. Pete, I need to know who else was here around midnight last night. Other customers, employees, anyone who might have seen this person. Pete checked his credit card terminal records and gave me a list of transactions from the relevant time period. Most were routine fuel purchases, coffee, snacks. But one transaction stood out: a cash purchase of zip ties, electrical tape, and a small utility knife from the truck stop's maintenance section. Items that would be perfect for sabotaging brake lines. Over the next week, I expanded my investigation beyond Jennifer's case. If someone was sabotaging trucks for insurance fraud or simple malice, there might be other incidents. What I discovered kept me awake for nights. 3 other propane haulers had experienced brake failures in the past 6 months, all on mountain highways in Tennessee and Kentucky. 2 had resulted in minor accidents, one in a near miss, when the driver managed to guide his truck up a runaway truck ramp. In each case, the drivers had fueled at truck stops along the Interstate 75 corridor in the hours before their brake failures. The pattern was clear. Someone was systematically targeting propane tankers, sabotaging their brake systems without understanding that they were creating rolling bombs capable of leveling entire communities. I contacted the other investigating agencies and found that none of them had connected their cases. Each incident had been treated as isolated equipment failure or driver error. But when I laid out the timeline and locations, the methodical nature of the sabotage became undeniable. The breakthrough came when I reviewed security footage from the truck stop where the second incident had originated. The same dark-clad figure appeared, moving with the same purposeful gait, disappearing under a different propane tanker for the same precise 4-minute interval. But this time, the camera angle was better. I could see part of the person's face, and something about the build and movement pattern seemed familiar. I'd seen this person before, but I couldn't place where. It wasn't until I was reviewing Jennifer's case file for the 4th time that the connection clicked. In her statement, she'd mentioned seeing 1 or 2 other drivers at the truck stop, but nobody who'd paid attention to her. I pulled the credit card records from that night and cross-referenced them with commercial driver's license databases. One name stood out: William Chen, an independent owner-operator hauling dry goods between Atlanta and Louisville. His transaction timestamp put him at the truck stop during the exact window when Jennifer's truck had been sabotaged. But Chen wasn't just a random driver. When I ran his background, I discovered he'd filed 13 insurance claims for equipment failures over the past 18 months, an unusually high number that suggested either terrible luck or systematic fraud. The horrifying truth began to take shape. Chen was sabotaging other drivers' trucks to create a pattern of brake failures that would make his own fraudulent claims seem more credible. But in his greed and ignorance, he'd been selecting propane haulers as targets, not realizing that a brake failure in a fuel tanker was different from a brake failure in a trailer full of consumer goods. Jennifer Caldwell hadn't been the victim of a random crime. She'd been selected as collateral damage in an insurance fraud scheme that could have killed thousands of people. When we arrested Chen at a truck stop outside Nashville, he initially denied everything. But faced with security camera footage and forensic evidence from 4 separate crime scenes, he eventually confessed. What he told us during interrogation still haunts me. "I just wanted the brake failures to look normal," he said, staring at his hands. "I never thought about what they were hauling. Propane, diesel, chemicals, it was all just cargo to me." He genuinely hadn't understood that he was creating potential weapons. In his mind, a brake failure was just a brake failure, regardless of what the truck was carrying. The fact that any one of his sabotage jobs could have created an explosion visible from orbit had never occurred to him. Chen was sentenced to life in prison without parole on federal terrorism charges. But the case still keeps me awake some nights, not because of what happened, but because of what almost happened. 4 communities that came within minutes of being wiped off the map by one man's greedy ignorance. I still investigate trucking accidents, but I pay closer attention now to the patterns that might suggest deliberate sabotage. And every time I see a propane tanker on the highway, I think about Jennifer Caldwell's lucky escape and wonder how many other rolling bombs are out there, just waiting for someone stupid enough to light the fuse. Carl Johansson's last transmission came through my headset at exactly 3:47 p.m., but his voice had been wrong for hours before that. My name is Beth Martinez, and I've been working dispatch for Great Plains Transport out of Rapid City for 9 years. CB Channel 19 is my office, a constant stream of weather reports, route updates, and the occasional complaint about fuel prices or DOT inspectors. You learn to recognize your drivers by their voices, their speech patterns, their particular way of handling the radio protocols we all pretend to follow but rarely do. Carl had been one of our steadiest drivers for 12 years. Professional, punctual, never missed a check-in. He hauled fuel oil from the refineries in Wyoming to distribution centers across the Midwest, following the same routes with the precision of a man who understood that routine kept you safe and profitable. His radio voice was as familiar to me as my own husband's steady, slightly nasal, with a tendency to end transmissions with Great Plains Unit 77, clear. That Tuesday afternoon started normally enough. Carl had picked up a full load in Casper and was making his usual run east on Interstate 90, scheduled to deliver in Sioux Falls the following morning. His first check-in came right on schedule at 11 a.m. from the Wyoming-South Dakota border. Great Plains Dispatch, this is Unit 77 eastbound on 90 at mile marker 408. On schedule for Sioux Falls delivery, fuel load secure, weather clear. Copy that, 77. Looks like smooth sailing all the way to Iowa. Have a safe run, Carl. Will do, dispatch. Great Plains Unit 77, clear. Nothing unusual there. Carl's transmissions were always professional, always followed the same pattern. But something was different about his voice that morning, a tension I couldn't quite identify, like he was reading from a script instead of just talking. The second check-in came at 1:15 p.m. from somewhere near Wall, South Dakota. Great Plains Dispatch, this is Unit 77 on Highway 16 south of Wall. Continuing eastbound, everything normal. Again, the words were right, but the delivery was off. Carl sounded tired, which wasn't unusual for a long haul. But there was something else, a kind of careful quality to his speech, as if he was choosing each word deliberately. Copy 77. How's your fuel situation? There was a pause longer than usual for Carl, who always had his numbers ready. Fuel's good, dispatch. Should make it to Sioux Falls without a top-off. Understood. Check in again at your next scheduled stop. Will do. Great Plains Unit 77. Clear. But as the transmission ended, I thought I heard something in the background. Another voice, very faint, saying almost the same words Carl had just spoken. An echo maybe, or interference from another channel bleeding through. The third transmission came at 2:45 p.m., and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Great Plains Dispatch. This is Unit 77 on Highway 44, approaching Badlands National Park. I've got a problem here. Carl's voice was strained now, no longer trying to sound normal. I could hear the tension clearly. And something else, fear. What's your situation? 77. There's another truck following me. Has been for the last 100 miles. Same model as mine. Same color scheme. Even the same company markings. It's staying about a quarter-mile back, matching my speed exactly. I felt a chill run down my spine. Great Plains only had one truck matching Carl's specifications on the road that day, his own. Carl, can you get a visual on the driver? Might be another fuel hauler, just coincidentally running the same route. That's just it, dispatch. I can't see the driver clearly, but the truck, it's identical to mine. I mean identical. Same scratches on the cab, same mud flaps, same CB antenna configuration. It's like looking in a mirror. Are you sure about this 77? Trucks can look pretty similar from a distance. I've been driving for 23 years, Beth. I know my own truck, and I'm telling you, that's my truck following me. but I'm sitting in my truck talking to you right now." The fear in Carl's voice was unmistakable now. I'd heard drivers report all kinds of strange things over the years: phantom vehicles, mysterious lights, voices on the radio that shouldn't be there. The highway does things to your mind when you're alone for too long. But Carl wasn't the type to imagine things. "Okay, Carl, I want you to try something. Speed up gradually and see if the other truck matches your change in pace." Already tried that. When I speed up, it speeds up. When I slow down, it slows down. It's like it knows what I'm going to do before I do it. What about the CB? Try raising the other driver on channel 19. There was another long pause. Then Carl's voice came back, but now I could hear real terror in it. "Beth, I tried the radio. When I transmitted, I could see the other driver pick up his microphone at exactly the same time. But when he responded..." "What happened, Carl?" "It was my own voice coming back at me. Same words, same timing, like a perfect recording. But I wasn't saying anything." My hands were shaking as I reached for the Emergency Protocols Handbook. In 9 years of dispatching, I'd never encountered anything like this. But before I could decide what to do next, Carl's voice crackled through the speaker again. "Dispatch, the other truck is getting closer. It's moving up beside me now. Carl, I'm going to patch you through to the South Dakota Highway Patrol. Just stay calm and keep driving." "I can see the driver now, Beth." "Oh God, I can see the driver." The transmission cut to static, then came back with Carl's voice, but different somehow. Flatter, more mechanical. "The driver looks exactly like me. Same face, same clothes, same everything. He's looking right at me and smiling. And it's my own smile looking back. Carl, get off that highway. Take the next exit and find a safe place to stop. He's trying to force me off the road. Every time I try to change lanes, he blocks me. Every time I try to brake, he brakes too, staying right beside me. It's like he knows what I'm thinking." The Highway Patrol dispatcher came on the channel. "Unit 77, this is South Dakota Highway Patrol. We're sending units to your location. Can you provide your exact position?" But Carl's response came in two voices, simultaneously, his real voice and an identical echo speaking the same words at the same time, creating a horrible harmony that made my skin crawl. "Mile marker 167 on Highway 44, approaching the park entrance. He's forcing me toward the guardrail." Then, impossibly, I heard Carl's voice again, but from a different radio transmission, as clear as if he were sitting next to me. "Great Plains Dispatch. This is Unit 77. Everything's fine out here. Just wanted to check in before I lose radio contact in the Badlands." Two Carl Johanssons were on the radio at the same time, giving completely different reports. One in terror, one calm and routine. One real, one something else entirely. "Carl, which transmission is really you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Both voices responded simultaneously. "This is the real Carl, Beth. The other one is the fake." The final transmission came at 3:47 p.m. A screaming tangle of Carl's voice, multiplied and overlapping, as if a dozen identical drivers were all transmitting at once. Through the chaos, I could make out fragments. "He's ramming me. We're going over the edge. Why does he look exactly like me?" Tell my wife. Then silence. The Highway Patrol found both trucks at the bottom of a ravine near mile marker 172. Identical fuel tankers, identical damage patterns, identical drivers. The investigation concluded that someone had stolen a truck matching Carl's specifications and used it to force him off the road in an elaborate murder-suicide. But the official report couldn't explain why both drivers had Carl's fingerprints, Carl's dental records, and Carl's DNA. It couldn't explain why security cameras at truck stops along the route showed the same man fueling both trucks at different times. And it couldn't explain the CB radio logs that showed Carl Johansson having conversations with himself for over 200 miles before his death. I still work dispatch, but I listen to every transmission differently now. Sometimes, late at night when the channels are quiet, I hear Carl's voice checking in from routes he'll never drive again. And I wonder if somewhere out there, another driver is looking in his mirrors and seeing his own face staring back, knowing that the road ahead leads only to the bottom of a ravine where two identical men wait to welcome him home. Patricia Santos's truck kept driving for 3 days after she stopped answering her radio. But the routes it took existed only in electronic signals that spelled out her death. My name is Alex Rivera, and I've been monitoring commercial vehicle tracking systems for Apex Chemical Transport for 7 years. From my office in Bakersfield, I watch over 43 drivers hauling hazardous materials across 11 western states, their positions updated every 30 seconds on a bank of monitors that never sleep. GPS coordinates, engine diagnostics, fuel consumption, hours of service. I know where every truck is, where it's going, and exactly when it should arrive. The technology is supposed to keep our drivers safe. Real-time tracking means we can dispatch help immediately if something goes wrong, monitor for vehicle breakdowns or route deviations, ensure our hazmat loads reach their destinations without incident. After 8 years of hauling industrial acids, caustics, and solvents, Patricia had never missed a scheduled check-in or deviated from her approved routes. She was the kind of driver you could set your watch by. That's why I knew something was wrong when her truck started making impossible turns on Highway 190 through Death Valley. Patricia's last confirmed radio transmission came at 2:37 p.m. on a Thursday in September of 2023. She was eastbound near Furnace Creek, carrying a full load of concentrated sulfuric acid to a manufacturing plant in Phoenix, scheduled to arrive Friday morning. Her truck's GPS showed her maintaining steady speed, following the planned route, all systems functioning normally. Apex Dispatch. This is Unit 4-1, approaching Furnace Creek. All green on the board. ETA Phoenix 0800 tomorrow. Copy 4-1. Weather looks clear all the way to Arizona. Drive safe, Patricia. Will do, dispatch. Unit 4-1 clear. Professional, routine. Exactly what I expected from Patricia. But that was the last time I heard her voice. At 4:15 p.m., Patricia's truck stopped transmitting radio signals, but her GPS continued to show movement. According to the tracking system, she was still eastbound on Highway 190, maintaining legal speed, following her assigned route. Everything appeared normal except for the complete radio silence. I tried raising her on channel 19, then on the company frequency, then on her cell phone. No response. Not unusual in Death Valley, where radio coverage can be spotty and cell towers are few and far between. I made a note to check on her again in an hour, and continued monitoring the other drivers. But when I looked at Patricia's position an hour later, something was wrong with the data. According to the GPS, her truck had traveled 67 miles in the past hour, well within normal highway speeds. But the route she'd taken was impossible. The tracking system showed her truck passing through areas where no roads existed, cutting straight lines across mountain ranges and dry lake beds that would be impassable to any vehicle. I called the GPS vendor's technical support, thinking we had a system malfunction. The technician ran diagnostics on Patricia's tracking unit and found no problems. Signals coming through clear, he told me. Coordinates are valid, timestamp is accurate, and the unit is reporting normal vehicle operation. Your driver is currently eastbound on Highway 190 at mile marker 147. But when I checked the mapping software, mile marker 147 was in the middle of a restricted military testing area where civilian vehicles were prohibited. Patricia couldn't be there, but according to our most advanced tracking technology, she was. Over the next 2 days, Patricia's truck continued its impossible journey across the desert. The GPS showed steady eastbound progress, but the route defied geography and physics. Her truck appeared to pass through solid rock formations, cross uncrossable terrain, and maintain highway speeds over surfaces that existed only on satellite images taken decades ago. Friday morning came and went without Patricia arriving at her scheduled delivery. I contacted the Phoenix facility, but they hadn't seen her. I called the Arizona Highway Patrol, but they had no record of accidents or incidents involving her truck. According to every official source, Patricia Santos had simply vanished somewhere in the Mojave Desert. But her truck kept driving. On Saturday, the GPS showed Patricia's vehicle in Nevada, then Utah, then Colorado, covering distances that would require non-stop driving at speeds no chemical hauler could legally maintain. The tracking data suggested she was making a delivery run across half the western United States, but to destinations that didn't exist at coordinates that led nowhere. I spent the weekend studying the GPS logs, trying to make sense of the impossible data. Patricia's truck was reporting normal engine temperatures, adequate fuel levels, and proper cargo containment. But the locations it was reporting didn't correspond to any known highways or truck routes. Monday morning brought a breakthrough that filled me with dread rather than relief. The FBI contacted our company about Patricia's disappearance, and Agent Thompson asked me to walk through the GPS tracking data from her final days. As I showed him the impossible routes and contradictory coordinates, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Mr. Rivera, how familiar are you with GPS spoofing technology?" "Not very." "Is that what you think happened to Patricia's truck?" "We think Patricia discovered something she wasn't supposed to see, and someone with sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities has been using her truck's tracking system to mask their operations." Agent Thompson explained that criminal organizations had begun using GPS spoofers and signal jammers to create false tracking data, making it appear that hijacked vehicles were continuing their normal routes while actually being diverted to hidden locations. But Patricia's case was different. The spoofing was too sophisticated, too detailed, too perfect. "Whoever did this has been planning it for months," Thompson said, studying the tracking logs. "They knew Patricia's routes, her schedule, her truck's electronic signature. They've been using her GPS signal to create a digital ghost truck that could travel anywhere without raising suspicion." But the most chilling revelation came when Thompson showed me what the kidnappers had actually been doing with Patricia's truck. While her GPS signal led us on a 3-day wild chase across the western states, security cameras at a chemical plant in Nevada had recorded her actual truck being stripped of its hazardous cargo by men in military-style equipment. "They stole 15,000 gallons of concentrated sulfuric acid," Thompson said quietly, "enough to dissolve several city blocks or create weapons that could kill thousands of people." "What about Patricia?" Thompson's silence answered that question. The investigation eventually revealed that Patricia had been murdered within hours of her disappearance. Killed when she realized that the supposed routine inspection she'd been directed to was actually a sophisticated hijacking operation. Her truck had been taken to a remote facility where the chemical cargo was offloaded for sale to domestic terrorist organizations planning attacks on federal buildings. But for 3 days after her death, Patricia's GPS signal had continued to move across the country, following a pre-programmed route designed to confuse investigators and buy the killers time to complete their operation. The technology meant to protect her had been turned into an instrument of deception, creating a digital phantom that masked the reality of her murder. The killers were eventually caught, but not before Patricia's stolen chemicals were used in an attempted bombing that was thwarted only by luck and the dedication of federal agents who'd been tracking the case. I still monitor GPS tracking systems, but I watch the data differently now. Every blip on the screen, every route deviation, every electronic signal represents not just a truck and its cargo, but a human being alone on America's highways, trusting that someone is watching over them. Sometimes, late at night when the office is quiet, I still see Patricia's truck on my monitors, a ghost signal that appears briefly on the tracking screens before fading back into the electronic static. A reminder that in our connected world, the very technology we depend on for safety can be turned against us by those who understand its vulnerabilities better than we understand our own. Miguel Restrepo died asking for water, but his burns told a story about gasoline that I knew couldn't be true. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I've been working the trauma burn unit at University Medical Center in El Paso for 14 years. In that time, I've treated victims of house fires, industrial accidents, electrical burns, and every other way the human body can be damaged by heat and flame. You learn to read burn patterns like a language, the depth, the distribution, the telltale signs that separate accident from intent. Miguel was brought in by helicopter on a Tuesday morning in March of 2024, airlifted from the Organ Mountains, where his fuel tanker had crashed and burned on Highway 70. Third-degree burns over 60% of his body, smoke inhalation, the kind of trauma that challenges everything we know about keeping someone alive. But Miguel was conscious when they brought him in, and that's when I heard him say something that would haunt me for months. He told me to get out of the cab. Miguel whispered through the breathing apparatus we'd inserted to keep his airways open, said there was a problem with the road surface. But when I opened the door, he poured gasoline all around the truck. I assumed he was delirious from pain medication and trauma. Burn victims often experience confusion, false memories, hallucinations brought on by shock and medication. But Miguel's story remained consistent through 3 days of treatment, even as his condition deteriorated. Highway maintenance man, he kept repeating whenever he was lucid enough to speak. Orange vest, hard hat, official truck. Said he needed to inspect something under my trailer. That's when he started pouring the fuel. Miguel died on Thursday evening, but his words stayed with me. In 14 years of treating burn victims, I'd never heard anyone describe a fuel fire that had been deliberately set by someone impersonating a highway worker. It was too specific, too detailed to be a pain-induced hallucination. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I started researching other fuel tanker fires in New Mexico and West Texas. What I found in the newspaper archives and police reports made my hands shake as I read. Over the past 18 months, 7 fuel tanker drivers had died in highway fires between Las Cruces and El Paso, all on remote sections of highway, all during daylight hours, all initially ruled as accidental spills that had somehow ignited. The pattern was subtle enough that no single investigating agency had connected the cases, but when I laid them out chronologically, the similarities were undeniable. Each driver had been found dead in their cab, burned beyond recognition. Each truck had crashed after what appeared to be a fuel spill. And in 3 of the cases, witness statements mentioned seeing a highway maintenance vehicle in the area shortly before the fire. Monday morning, I called Detective Rosa Martinez with the New Mexico State Police and told her about Miguel's dying declaration. Her reaction was immediate and chilling. Dr. Vasquez, we've been looking for a pattern in these highway fires for months. If your patient was telling the truth about someone impersonating a road worker, we might be dealing with a serial killer. Detective Martinez came to the hospital that afternoon and interviewed my nursing staff about Miguel's statements. But it was my colleague, Dr. James Park, who provided the most disturbing information. I've treated 2 other burn victims from highway fires in the past year, Park told us. Both fuel tanker drivers, both with similar burn patterns, and both mentioned seeing a highway worker just before their accidents. The victims Park had treated hadn't survived long enough to provide detailed statements, but their brief comments painted the same picture. A man in official highway maintenance gear, flagging down tanker trucks on isolated stretches of desert highway, then using the driver's own fuel to murder them. Detective Martinez launched a full investigation, and what she discovered confirmed our worst fears. The killer had been operating a stolen New Mexico Department of Transportation truck, complete with legitimate license plates and official markings. Security cameras at truck stops along Interstate 10 had captured footage of the fake maintenance worker following fuel tankers, learning their routes and schedules before selecting his victims. But the most chilling aspect of the case was the methodology. The killer wasn't just murdering drivers, he was stealing their fuel before setting the fires, draining thousands of gallons from each tanker and transporting it to a hidden location where he was selling it on the black market. Miguel and the others had died not for revenge or personal grudges, but for the simple economic value of the gasoline they carried. He's been treating these drivers like mobile gas stations, Martinez told me during one of our briefings. Flag them down with fake roadwork, force them to exit their vehicles, drain the fuel, then burn the evidence. Clean, efficient, and nearly impossible to detect, unless you know what to look for. The breakthrough came when Martinez's team found the killer's storage facility, an abandoned ranch in the Oregon mountains where he'd been stockpiling stolen fuel in underground tanks. Forensic analysis of soil samples revealed traces of gasoline that matched the chemical signatures from Miguel's truck and 3 other crime scenes. But the killer, a former Highway Department employee named Robert Chen, who had been dismissed for theft 2 years earlier, had vanished by the time police reached the ranch. The investigation revealed that Chen had intimate knowledge of highway maintenance procedures, legitimate access to department vehicles and equipment, and a perfect cover story that allowed him to approach trusting drivers without raising suspicion. He knew exactly what to say to get drivers to stop, Martinez explained. Road surface problems, weight restrictions, mandatory inspections. He was using their own professional obligations against them. 3 weeks after Miguel's death, Chen was arrested at a truck stop in Arizona, preparing to flag down another fuel tanker using the same methods that had killed 8 drivers. When police searched his stolen maintenance truck, they found detailed route maps, driver schedules, and enough accelerant to create infernos that would have consumed evidence for miles. The case officially closed with Chen's arrest and conviction, but I still think about Miguel's final words. In his last conscious hours, he kept asking the same question. How was I supposed to know he wasn't real? That question haunts me, because the answer is simple and terrifying. Miguel couldn't have known. Chen had perfected his impersonation, down to the official uniforms, proper radio protocols, and intimate knowledge of highway maintenance procedures. He looked and acted exactly like the legitimate highway workers drivers encounter every day. I still work the burn unit, still treat victims of fires and explosions and all the ways heat can destroy human tissue. But I listen to my patients differently now, paying attention to details that might seem like delirium, but could be the only witness testimony to crimes disguised as accidents. Sometimes, late during night shifts when the unit is quiet, I find myself thinking about the trust that exists between drivers and the people who maintain our highways. The assumption that someone in an official uniform, driving an official vehicle, has your safety in mind rather than your destruction. Miguel Restrepo died because he did exactly what every professional driver is trained to do: cooperate with highway maintenance personnel, follow official instructions, trust the system that's supposed to keep him safe. His final question, how was he supposed to know the difference between help and murder, has no good answer. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Robert Henley's truck was found in a grove of 1,000-year-old cedars that shouldn't have been accessible to any vehicle built since the invention of the wheel. My name is Commander Janet Sullivan, and I've been coordinating search and rescue operations for the Olympic National Forest for 16 years. From my station near Port Angeles, I oversee emergency responses across nearly 1 million acres of some of the most challenging wilderness terrain in the continental United States. Dense old-growth forests, steep mountain slopes, and weather patterns that can turn deadly without warning. When people go missing in the Olympics, they usually stay missing unless we find them within the first 72 hours. Robert Henley should never have been in the forest at all. He was a commercial dairy hauler, transporting liquid milk products from processing plants in Seattle to distribution centers in Portland. His route followed Highway 101 along the coast, well-maintained roads with cell tower coverage and regular truck stops. The kind of predictable, safe corridor that experienced drivers like Robert had been running for 15 years without incident. His last radio transmission came through our emergency monitoring station at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October of 2023. Commercial drivers sometimes used our frequencies when they encountered problems in areas where cellular service was unreliable, so hearing a trucker's voice wasn't unusual. Any station, this is a dairy hauler on Highway 101 near Lake Crescent. I'm having some kind of GPS malfunction. My navigation system is showing roads that don't exist. I responded immediately. This is Olympic National Forest Search and Rescue. What's your exact location and nature of your problem? I'm not sure of my exact location. That's the problem. My GPS shows me on a paved highway heading toward Portland, but I'm looking at what appears to be a Forest Service road. Narrow, unpaved, definitely not suitable for a commercial vehicle. Robert's voice was calm, but concerned, the tone of a professional driver who knew something was seriously wrong with his situation. I pulled up topographical maps of the Lake Crescent area, but there were no Forest Service roads that intersected with Highway 101 in a way that could cause GPS confusion. Can you see any mile markers or road signs that might help determine your location? That's the strange thing. I can see construction signs indicating a detour ahead, but they're directing me deeper into what looks like forest terrain. The signs appear official Washington State DOT markings, proper reflective materials, but they're pointing toward roads that my maps don't show. A chill ran down my spine. In 16 years of coordinating rescues, I'd never heard of construction detours that led into the national forest. All legitimate roadwork projects were coordinated through multiple agencies, including Park Services, and I would have been notified of any activities that might affect emergency access routes. Robert, I need you to stop your vehicle immediately and do not follow those construction signs. Can you turn around and return to the last known intersection? I'm trying, but there seems to be construction equipment blocking the road behind me. Orange barrels, flashing lights, what looks like a legitimate work zone. I can't see a way to turn around. The transmission was breaking up, filled with static that suggested Robert was moving deeper into terrain where radio propagation was compromised by the forest canopy and mountainous topography. But what disturbed me more was the impossibility of what he was describing. Robert, there is no authorized construction work in your area. I repeat, there are no legitimate road detours leading into the national forest from Highway 101. The response came back fragmented, Robert's voice cutting in and out through increasing interference. Construction workers directing traffic. GPS still showing Portland route. And this doesn't look right, but the signs are official. That was the last transmission we received from Robert Henley. I immediately contacted the Washington State Patrol, the Department of Transportation, and every agency with jurisdiction over Highway 101. None of them had authorized construction work near Lake Crescent. No detours, no road maintenance, no legitimate reason for a commercial vehicle to leave the main highway. By Friday morning, we had launched a full search operation. Robert's employer provided GPS tracking data from his truck, but the coordinates led us to locations that made no geographic sense. According to the electronic data, his truck was simultaneously on Highway 101, heading toward Portland, and deep in the forest on logging roads that had been closed to commercial traffic for decades. The search teams spent 2 days following GPS coordinates that led nowhere, tracking phantom signals through terrain that became increasingly impassable. It wasn't until Sunday afternoon that a helicopter spotted something that shouldn't have existed. Tire tracks from a large commercial vehicle cutting through old-growth forest along what appeared to be a carefully constructed but completely unofficial road. Following those tracks led us to Robert's truck. The dairy tanker sat in a grove of ancient cedars, some of which had to be 800 years old, surrounded by wilderness so pristine that park regulations prohibited any motorized vehicles. But someone had created a road hidden from aerial surveys by the forest canopy, constructed with professional-grade equipment, leading deep into areas where no human presence should have been possible. Robert's body was found 50 yards from his truck, and the scene told a story that still gives me nightmares. The investigation revealed that someone had been using sophisticated GPS spoofing equipment to create false navigation signals that overrode drivers' legitimate routing systems. Modified road construction signs, with official-looking reflective materials and proper government markings, had been strategically placed to guide confused drivers onto hidden forest roads where they could be isolated and killed, without witnesses. But the most disturbing discovery was the scope of the operation. FBI forensic teams found evidence of at least 6 other commercial vehicles that had been lured into the same area over the past 2 years. The killer had been systematically targeting drivers who traveled remote sections of coastal highways, using their trust in GPS technology and official signage to lead them into what amounted to an elaborate killing ground. Detective Harrison from the FBI's Seattle field office explained the methodology during one of our briefings. The perpetrator understood that commercial drivers are trained to follow official detour signs and trust their navigation systems. He exploited that professional compliance by creating convincing replicas of legitimate traffic control devices. The killer was eventually identified as Douglas Price, a former Department of Transportation engineer who had been dismissed for falsifying safety reports 3 years earlier. Price had intimate knowledge of road construction protocols, access to official signage materials, and the technical expertise to create GPS spoofing systems that could override commercial navigation equipment. When they arrested Price at a remote cabin deeper in the national forest, investigators found detailed maps of Pacific Northwest highways, GPS jamming equipment, and enough official road construction materials to create convincing detour scenarios for dozens of additional murders. He was treating the entire forest like his personal hunting ground, Harrison told me, using drivers' own professional training and technological dependence against them. Robert Henley's death officially closed the case, but it opened questions that still keep me awake during night shifts. In our connected world, we depend on electronic systems to navigate terrain we don't actually understand. We trust that the roads shown on our screens correspond to reality, that official signs reflect legitimate authority, that the technology meant to keep us safe hasn't been corrupted by those who understand its vulnerabilities better than we do. I still coordinate search and rescue operations, but I listen to emergency transmissions differently now. Every confused driver reporting GPS malfunctions, every lost traveler describing roads that don't match their maps, could be the next victim of someone who's learned to weaponize our technological dependence. Sometimes, during the quiet hours when the radio is silent, I think about Robert's last transmission and wonder how many other drivers are out there right now, following GPS directions toward destinations that exist only in the minds of people who mean them harm. Linda Kozlov died from chemical poisoning inside a tanker truck, equipped with every safety system designed to prevent exactly that kind of death. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb, and I've been working hazardous materials response for the Montana Department of Environmental Quality for 12 years. When chemical spills occur, when industrial accidents release toxic substances into the environment, I'm part of the team that responds to assess exposure levels, treat victims, and determine what went wrong. It's technical work that requires understanding both human physiology and industrial chemistry, knowing how dangerous substances affect living tissue and what safety protocols should have prevented exposure in the first place. Linda was brought to St. Patrick Hospital in Kalispell on a Friday afternoon in August of 2023, airlifted from Glacier National Park, where her chemical tanker had been found abandoned on the Going to the Sun Road service route. She was unconscious, suffering from acute respiratory distress, and symptoms consistent with prolonged exposure to industrial solvents. The kind of exposure that should have been impossible given the safety equipment she was hauling. I was called in because Linda's cargo manifest listed methylene chloride and trichloroethylene chemicals so dangerous that federal regulations require multiple redundant safety systems to prevent human contact. Her tanker should have been sealed, ventilated, and monitored by temperature sensors designed to alert drivers to any vapor leakage. The idea that she could have been exposed to lethal concentrations while inside her own cab defied everything I understood about hazmat transport safety. But Linda's blood work told a story that didn't match the accident report. Her chemical exposure levels were consistent with hours of sustained contact in an enclosed space, not the brief exposure you'd expect from equipment failure or a traffic accident. Someone had been breathing concentrated industrial solvents for an extended period, and the pattern of toxicity suggested she'd been unable to escape the source. The preliminary investigation indicates equipment malfunction, Park Ranger Tom Hendricks told me when I arrived at the hospital. Temperature monitoring system failed. Cargo bay seals compromised. Driver apparently overcome by fumes before she could exit the vehicle. But as I reviewed Linda's medical data, I noticed anomalies that suggested a very different scenario. Her injuries were consistent with someone who had been conscious and struggling for a significant period during the exposure. Fingernail trauma, defensive wounds on her hands, elevated stress hormone levels that indicated prolonged terror rather than sudden unconsciousness from toxic fumes. Tom, I need to see the truck. Something about this case doesn't add up. We drove to the impound facility, where Linda's tanker was being held for federal investigation. The vehicle appeared normal from the outside: professional paint job, proper hazmat placards, all required safety equipment, visible and apparently functional. But when I examined the cab interior, I found details that made my blood run cold. The air circulation system had been deliberately disabled, not broken or malfunctioning, but systematically shut down using tools and knowledge that required intimate familiarity with the truck's safety systems. The emergency ventilation controls that should have allowed Linda to purge toxic fumes from the cab had been rerouted to draw air directly from the cargo compartment. Tom, this wasn't an accident. Someone modified this truck's safety systems to create a gas chamber. We called in the FBI's hazmat crime scene unit, and their investigation revealed the full scope of what had been done to Linda. The temperature monitoring system hadn't failed. It had been reprogrammed to display normal readings while the cargo bay was actually overheating, creating concentrated vapor clouds that were being pumped directly into the driver's compartment. But the most horrifying discovery was the cargo bay doors. They had been sealed from the outside using industrial adhesive and mechanical locks that could only be operated by someone with access to the exterior of the truck. Linda had been trapped inside her own cab, slowly poisoned by chemicals she'd been trained to transport safely, while someone who understood her safety protocols better than she did turned those same protocols into weapons. The killer knew exactly what chemicals Linda was hauling. FBI agent Sarah Chen explained during the briefing. Methylene chloride and trichloroethylene create specific symptoms at specific concentrations. This was a carefully planned murder designed to look like equipment failure. The investigation revealed that Linda had been targeted by someone who'd been studying hazmat transport procedures for months. Security camera footage from truck stops along Linda's regular routes showed a man in mechanic's coveralls, repeatedly photographing her truck, learning the location of safety controls, air intake systems, and emergency equipment. But the most disturbing aspect of the case was the timing. Linda's permit to use the restricted park service roads had been obtained through falsified documentation. Someone had used her legitimate credentials and route information to create fake transport orders that directed her to isolated mountain roads where she could be murdered without witnesses. He lured her to that location specifically, Agent Chen told me. The Going to the Sun Road service route provided the perfect killing ground. Remote, restricted access, minimal radio coverage, By the time anyone found her truck, she'd been dead for hours. The killer, identified as Thomas Morrison, a former chemical plant safety inspector who'd been dismissed for falsifying inspection reports, was arrested at his home in Whitefish. The search revealed detailed schematics of hazmat transport vehicles, modified safety equipment, and surveillance photos of Linda and 3 other female hazmat drivers. Morrison's confession revealed the calculated nature of the crime. He'd spent 8 months learning Linda's routines, her safety procedures, her trust in the equipment that was supposed to protect her. He'd used her own professional compliance with safety protocols to murder her, turning every system designed to preserve life into an instrument of death. I knew she'd follow proper procedures, Morrison told investigators. She'd check her safety equipment, trust her monitoring systems, follow the route on her falsified permits. Her professionalism made her predictable, and predictability made her vulnerable. Linda died 3 days after the attack without regaining consciousness, but not before providing one piece of evidence that haunts me still. In her delirium, she kept repeating the same phrase. The temperature gauge says normal, but I can taste the chemicals. Even as she was being murdered, Linda had been trying to understand why her safety equipment was providing false information. Her final conscious thoughts had been focused on troubleshooting systems that someone else had deliberately sabotaged to kill her. I still respond to hazmat incidents, still treat victims of chemical exposure, still investigate accidents that turn out to be more than accidents. But I examine safety equipment differently now, knowing that the systems we depend on to protect workers can be turned against them by anyone with sufficient knowledge and malicious intent. Sometimes, during night shifts when I'm alone in the lab analyzing chemical samples, I think about Linda's final words and wonder how many other hazmat drivers are out there right now, trusting safety equipment that someone else has learned to corrupt. The temperature gauges that say everything is normal, while death fills the air around them, one breath at a time. Thomas Brackwell called in his location to our emergency weather center 63 seconds before he vanished into what he believed was salvation from the tornado bearing down on Highway 35. My name is Dr. Rachel Stone, and I've been tracking severe weather systems for the National Weather Service in Norman, Oklahoma for 9 years. From our operations center, I monitor Doppler radar signatures, coordinate emergency broadcasts, and maintain radio contact with storm spotters and emergency responders across Tornado Alley. When the atmosphere turns violent, as it does regularly here in central Oklahoma, I'm one of the voices people hear, warning them to take shelter immediately. The storm system that killed Thomas was a classic Oklahoma supercell. Rotating winds, large hail, and the unmistakable hook echo on radar that indicates tornado formation. By 6:15 p.m. on May 14, 2023, we'd issued tornado warnings for Cleveland and McLean counties, with confirmed touchdowns reported near Moore. Commercial vehicles were being advised to abandon their routes and seek immediate underground shelter. Thomas was hauling propane from a distribution center in Oklahoma City to a retail facility in Dallas, following Interstate 35 through some of the most tornado-prone real estate in America. When severe weather threatens, propane haulers face a terrible choice: continue driving with a potential bomb behind them, or stop and hope they can find adequate shelter for both themselves and their hazardous cargo. His radio transmission came through our emergency coordination frequency at 6:52 p.m., calm and professional despite the circumstances. Norman Weather Service. This is commercial vehicle operator Thomas Brackwell. I'm southbound on I-35 near Moore with a propane load. Severe weather approaching my location. I've located what appears to be a designated storm shelter and am proceeding to seek cover. Copy that, Mr. Brackwell. What's your exact location and the nature of the shelter facility? Mile marker 127, just east of the highway. There's a clearly marked underground storm shelter with official signage. Concrete entrance, steel doors. Appears to be a community facility designed for commercial vehicle operators. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping barometric pressure. In 9 years of coordinating tornado responses, I'd never heard of a commercial vehicle storm shelter at mile marker 127. The closest official shelter was 15 miles north at the Canadian County Emergency Management Facility. Thomas, can you describe the signage on this shelter? Who's listed as the operating authority? Oklahoma Emergency Management. Standard blue and white signs with reflective lettering. Instructions for commercial hazmat vehicles seeking storm shelter. Looks completely legitimate. But I was already pulling up our database of registered emergency shelters, and there was nothing listed for that location. Nothing at all, except agricultural land that had been purchased by a private owner 3 years earlier. Thomas, I need you to remain at ground level and provide additional details about this facility. I'm not showing any authorized shelters at your location. The response was broken by static and the sound of intensifying wind. Roger that, but I can see the tornado about 2 miles west and moving directly toward my position. I need to get underground immediately. The shelter entrance is open, and there's someone directing traffic into the facility. Thomas, do not enter that shelter. I repeat, do not enter an unregistered facility. Drive north immediately to the Canadian County Emergency Management Shelter. But the transmission cut to static, and despite repeated attempts to raise Thomas on multiple frequencies, we received no further radio contact. The tornado passed through the area 23 minutes later, causing significant property damage, but no reported casualties. Emergency responders conducted systematic searches of the affected area, looking for Thomas's truck and any sign of the storm shelter he'd described. They found neither. What they did find, 3 days later, was a disturbing pattern of evidence that suggested Thomas Brackwell had become the victim of something far more dangerous than severe weather. FBI investigators discovered that someone had been placing fake emergency shelter signs along major truck routes through central Oklahoma, specifically targeting locations where commercial hazmat vehicles would be most vulnerable during severe weather events. The signs were professionally manufactured, complete with official state seals and emergency management logos that were virtually indistinguishable from legitimate markers. Someone's been studying commercial vehicle emergency procedures, Agent Lisa Martinez told me during the briefing. They knew exactly what signs drivers would be looking for during tornado warnings, and they created perfect replicas that would draw vehicles to specific locations. But the most chilling discovery was the underground facility itself. Using ground-penetrating radar, investigators located a sophisticated bunker complex built on the property where Thomas had reported finding shelter. The facility wasn't designed for emergency protection, it was a trap. The bunker contained fuel storage tanks, vehicle dismantling equipment, and living quarters, stocked with supplies that suggested long-term habitation. Someone had been using tornado warnings as hunting opportunities, luring commercial fuel haulers underground where they could be isolated and killed for their cargo. We think we're dealing with a survivalist who's been building a private fuel depot, Martinez explained. He's using extreme weather events as cover for what amounts to organized piracy of commercial hazmat loads. The investigation revealed that Thomas wasn't the first victim. Over the past 2 years, 3 other propane and fuel oil drivers had disappeared during severe weather events in central Oklahoma. All had reported seeking shelter at facilities that didn't exist on any official registry. All had vanished without trace during tornado warnings, when emergency responders were focused on immediate life safety operations. The breakthrough came when investigators found surveillance equipment hidden near several legitimate storm shelters. The footage showed a man in emergency management clothing, observing commercial vehicles, photographing license plates, and studying cargo manifests. Someone had been systematically identifying fuel haulers and learning their routes in preparation for the next severe weather outbreak. He was using our own emergency broadcasts against us. I realized during one of the briefings, every tornado warning we issued gave him advance notice of when commercial drivers would be desperately seeking shelter. The suspect was identified as David Chen, a former emergency management coordinator who'd been dismissed from the Canadian County Office for unauthorized access to emergency supplies 3 years earlier. Chen had purchased the rural property using falsified documents and had been constructing his underground complex while studying commercial vehicle emergency procedures and National Weather Service protocols. When federal agents raided Chen's bunker, they found Thomas's truck partially dismantled and his propane cargo transferred to Chen's private storage system. The facility contained enough stolen fuel to supply a small community for months, along with detailed plans for expanding the operation to target additional commercial routes during future severe weather events. But they never found Thomas Brackwell. The investigation suggested he'd been killed shortly after entering the fake shelter, but Chen refused to provide information about the location of the body. He believed the government was going to collapse, and he needed to stockpile resources for survival, Martinez told me. In his mind, he was preparing for the apocalypse by creating his own personal apocalypse for anyone who had what he needed. Chen was convicted on federal terrorism charges and sentenced to life in prison. But the case fundamentally changed how I monitor severe weather events. Every tornado warning we issue, every emergency broadcast advising commercial vehicles to seek shelter, creates opportunities for predators who understand that people in genuine terror will trust anyone offering salvation. I still track storm systems, still coordinate emergency responses, still broadcast warnings that save lives. But I listen to radio transmissions differently now, knowing that somewhere in the darkness of every severe weather event, there might be someone waiting to exploit the very survival instincts that keep us alive. Sometimes, during the quiet hours between storm systems, I wonder how many other fake shelters are out there, marked with official-looking signs and maintained by people who've learned to weaponize our deepest fears about the natural world's power to kill us. Sarah McKenna died believing that help was always just a radio call away. But the voice she trusted for safety had been planning her murder for weeks. My name is Victoria Cross, and I've been operations manager for Summit Fuel Transport out of Denver for 11 years. I oversee route planning, driver assignments, and safety protocols for 43 drivers hauling gasoline, diesel, and heating oil across the Rocky Mountain region. It's my job to know where every truck is, when it should arrive, and what to do when something goes wrong. The drivers trust me with their schedules, their concerns, and ultimately, their lives. Sarah had been one of our most reliable drivers for 7 years. Professional, punctual, never missed a delivery window or violated safety regulations. She ran the Colorado Springs to Durango route every Monday and Thursday, leaving before dawn to avoid traffic and arrive at her destination by mid-morning. It was demanding work. Navigating mountain highways with a full load of gasoline requires concentration and experience that not every driver possesses. That Thursday morning in September of 2023 started like hundreds of others. Sarah called in her departure from the Colorado Springs terminal at 4:30 a.m., fully loaded with 8,000 gallons of premium unleaded for a chain of gas stations in the San Luis Valley. Summit Dispatch. This is Unit 12, departing Colorado Springs on schedule. Weather looks clear for the mountain crossing. Copy that 12. Have a safe run, Sarah. Check in again when you clear Wolf Creek Pass. The voice acknowledging Sarah's transmission belonged to Dennis Park, our night dispatcher. Dennis had been with Summit for 3 years, handling the late night and early morning communications when most of our drivers were either sleeping or just beginning their routes. He was reliable, knowledgeable about trucking regulations, and popular with the drivers who appreciated his calm demeanor during stressful situations. Sarah's next check-in came at 6:45 a.m. from Highway 160 near Alamosa, right on schedule. Summit Dispatch. This is Unit 12 eastbound on 160, clear of the mountains, continuing toward the sand dunes area. Beautiful sunrise out here. Roger, 12. You're making good time. Any traffic issues? Negative. Roads empty except for one vehicle that's been behind me since Del Norte. Keeping proper distance, no problems. That transmission should have raised immediate alarm bells, but Dennis's response was routine, professional, unremarkable. He didn't ask about the following vehicle, didn't suggest alternative routes, didn't implement any of the security protocols we'd established for drivers who reported being followed. Looking back, I realized that was the moment I should have known Dennis was involved. Sarah's final transmission came at 7:23 a.m. from what she described as a scenic pullout near Great Sand Dunes National Park. Summit Dispatch, Unit 12, taking a brief rest stop at mile marker 47. The vehicle that was following me has also stopped. Driver appears to be having mechanical difficulties. Copy 12. Do you need assistance? Negative. But the other driver is approaching my truck. Appears to be requesting help with what looks like a fuel leak. That was the last time anyone heard Sarah McKenna's voice. When Sarah failed to check in at her scheduled delivery time, I tried raising her on multiple frequencies. No response. I contacted the Colorado State Patrol, but they had no reports of accidents or incidents along Highway 160. By afternoon, we'd launched a full search operation. They found Sarah's truck at mile marker 47, exactly where she'd reported stopping. But Sarah was lying beside the fuel tanker, with a single gunshot wound to the head, executed with the clinical precision of someone who'd done this before. The investigation revealed details that turned my understanding of our company's security inside out. Sarah hadn't been the victim of a random highway crime, or even a sophisticated fuel theft operation. She'd been deliberately targeted by someone who knew her exact route, her timing, her scheduled rest stops, and her tendency to help other drivers in distress. The killer knew everything about her routine, Detective Jennifer Walsh told me during the briefing. Route, schedule, fuel load, even which pullout she preferred for rest breaks. That level of information had to come from inside your company. The possibility that someone at Summit was involved felt like a physical blow. I'd hired every dispatcher personally, trusted them with route information, relied on them to maintain the safety and security of our drivers. The idea that one of them might be selling that information to criminals was almost too horrifying to consider, but the evidence was undeniable. Security camera footage from truck stops along Sarah's route showed her being followed by the same vehicle that Dennis had dismissed as routine traffic. Cell phone records revealed that Dennis had been in contact with known fuel theft operations, providing detailed information about driver schedules, cargo loads, and preferred rest stops. Park wasn't just selling route information. Detective Walsh explained he was actively coordinating with thieves to set up ambush scenarios. Sarah's murder was planned weeks in advance, down to the specific location and timing. The investigation revealed that Dennis had been involved in at least 4 other driver deaths over the past 18 months. Each victim had been one of his drivers, people who called in their positions to him, trusted him with their locations, relied on him for guidance and support during long, isolated runs. He used their trust against them, Walsh told me. Every check-in call, every route update, every request for assistance was information he passed along to killers who were waiting at predetermined locations. But the most disturbing revelation was Dennis's method of selecting victims. He specifically targeted drivers who had begun to notice patterns, who asked too many questions about security protocols, or who expressed concern about being followed during their runs. Sarah had been killed not just for her cargo, but because she'd started to suspect that her routes were being leaked to criminals. When federal agents arrested Dennis at his apartment in Denver, they found detailed files on every Summit driver, including route maps, personal schedules, and what amounted to vulnerability assessments. He'd been treating our drivers like inventory, categorizing them by cargo value, route isolation, and likelihood of resistance. Park had created a catalog of targets, the FBI agent told me. He knew which drivers carried the most valuable loads, which routes offered the best opportunities for ambush, and which victims were least likely to be missed immediately. Dennis Park was sentenced to life in prison without parole for conspiracy to commit murder and federal terrorism charges. But his conviction couldn't undo the fundamental damage he'd done to the trust that makes commercial transportation possible. I still manage operations for Summit Fuel Transport, but I've implemented security protocols that would have seemed paranoid before Sarah's death. Route information is compartmentalized, schedules are varied randomly, and drivers are trained to trust no one completely, including their own dispatchers. Sometimes, during night shifts when I'm alone in the operations center, I listen to the radio chatter from our drivers and wonder how many other companies have a Dennis Park sitting in their dispatch centers selling lives for money. The voices that drivers trust for guidance, safety, and human connection during the loneliest hours on America's highways. Sarah McKenna died because she trusted the system designed to protect her, never suspecting that the voice offering help had been orchestrating her murder from the moment she turned the key in her ignition. That betrayal of trust haunts me more than any external threat ever could, because it came from inside the family we thought we could trust with our lives. Kevin O'Malley died during what he believed was a routine state fuel inspection, but the weigh station where they found his body had been closed for maintenance since 2021. My name is Inspector Carol Brennan, and I've been investigating fuel tax compliance for the Wyoming Department of Revenue for 14 years. My job involves tracking commercial fuel shipments, auditing delivery records, and ensuring that distributors pay proper taxes on petroleum products sold within state boundaries. It's meticulous work that requires understanding both the legitimate fuel distribution network and the various ways criminals attempt to evade taxation through illegal transfers and black market sales. Kevin had been hauling fuel across the Mountain West for Summit Energy Services for 9 years. Clean driving record, perfect tax compliance, the kind of professional operator who made my job easier by maintaining detailed logbooks and following every regulation to the letter. When his truck was found at the abandoned weigh station near Devil's Tower, my first assumption was mechanical failure or a medical emergency. But the scene didn't match that explanation. Kevin's body was discovered inside the weigh station office, slumped over a desk covered with what appeared to be legitimate inspection paperwork. His fuel tanker sat on the scales outside, completely empty despite cargo manifests showing he'd been hauling 8,000 gallons of diesel from Casper to Denver. Most disturbing was the absence of any tracks in the surrounding prairie, no evidence of how 8,000 gallons of fuel had been removed from the scene. It's like the cargo just vanished. Sheriff Thompson told me when I arrived to assist with the investigation. No spill evidence, no transfer equipment, no tire tracks from another vehicle. The fuel's just gone. I'd worked fuel theft cases before, but never one where the cargo had been removed so completely and professionally. Stealing that quantity of diesel requires specialized equipment, pumps, hoses, storage tanks, and transport vehicles that leave obvious evidence. But Kevin's tanker had been drained with surgical precision, leaving no trace of how or where the fuel had gone. The weigh station itself raised additional questions. According to my department's records, the facility had been closed for structural repairs since March of 2021. No inspections were scheduled, no personnel were assigned to the location, and no legitimate reason existed for Kevin to have stopped there. But when I examined the office where Kevin's body had been found, everything appeared operational. Fresh paperwork, functioning computers, official inspection forms that matched current Wyoming DOT templates. Someone had been maintaining the abandoned facility and using it for purposes that had nothing to do with legitimate fuel tax enforcement. Carol, you need to look at this. Sheriff Thompson called from behind the inspection office. He was standing beside a metal storage building I hadn't noticed during my initial examination of the scene. Inside, we found equipment that explained how Kevin's cargo had vanished so completely. Industrial fuel pumps, underground storage tanks, and transfer systems capable of moving thousands of gallons in minimal time. But more disturbing were the files, stored in metal cabinets along the walls. Detailed records of commercial fuel shipments, driver schedules, and tax documentation that should have been available only to state revenue personnel. Someone's been running a parallel fuel tax operation, I told Thompson, my hands shaking as I reviewed the paperwork. They've been intercepting legitimate shipments, killing the drivers, and selling the fuel through untaxed distribution networks. The investigation that followed revealed the scope of corruption within my own department. 3 senior revenue officials, including my direct supervisor, had been operating the fake weigh station as cover for a sophisticated fuel laundering operation. They'd been using legitimate inspection procedures to stop targeted drivers, murdering them during what appeared to be routine compliance checks, then selling their cargo to distributors who avoided state taxation. They had access to every piece of information they needed, FBI agent Maria Santos explained during the briefings. Driver schedules, cargo manifests, route planning, tax documentation. They could predict exactly when specific fuel loads would be traveling through remote areas where they could intercept them. The fake inspection paperwork found on Kevin's body had been designed to make his death look like a heart attack during a routine compliance check. The corrupted officials had used their legitimate authority and knowledge of inspection procedures to create perfect crimes disguised as natural deaths or administrative accidents. Kevin had been selected as a target because his regular route took him through isolated areas where an unscheduled stop at an abandoned weigh station wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. The killers had known his schedule, his cargo value, and his tendency to comply completely with official inspection requests. O'Malley was chosen because he was predictable. Agent Santos told me, professional drivers like him follow the rules, respect authority, and don't ask questions during routine inspections. That compliance made him an ideal victim. When the arrests were made, investigators found evidence that the corruption extended beyond my department. Local law enforcement, state highway officials, and even federal tax personnel had been involved in the fuel laundering operation, using their combined authority to create an infrastructure of murder disguised as legitimate government functions. The abandoned weigh station had been processing stolen fuel for nearly 3 years, generating millions of dollars in untaxed revenue, while systematically eliminating drivers who might have discovered the operation. Kevin was the 7th victim of what prosecutors called the most sophisticated fuel theft conspiracy in American history. My supervisor, Deputy Director William Hayes, received a life sentence for organizing the criminal network. During his trial, he showed no remorse for the murders he'd ordered, describing the dead drivers as acceptable losses in a necessary business operation. We provided a service, Hayes told the court. Untaxed fuel distribution that saved consumers money and generated revenue that the government would have wasted on bureaucracy. But Kevin O'Malley hadn't been bureaucracy. He'd been a human being with a wife, 2 daughters, and 23 years of professional service that ended with a bullet in the head during what he believed was a routine tax inspection. I still work fuel tax compliance, but for a different department in a different state. I've learned to view every official procedure, every inspection protocol, every regulatory requirement through the lens of how it could be corrupted by someone with the right access and wrong intentions. The scales of justice are supposed to ensure fairness, but I've seen how easily they can be rigged by those who understand the mechanisms of power better than those they're meant to serve. Kevin O'Malley died, trusting in a system that had been designed to kill him, and that betrayal of institutional faith is something that follows me every time I put on my badge and pretend to represent justice in a world where justice can be purchased by the highest bidder. Sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing fuel shipment records, I think about Kevin's final moments and wonder how many other drivers are out there right now, pulling into weigh stations that exist only to facilitate their own murders. Rebecca Martinez died carrying chemicals that were perfectly legal on both sides of the border, but worth killing for once you understood their alternative applications. My name is Agent David Hernandez, and I've been working customs enforcement for U.S. Border Patrol in the Big Bend sector for 8 years. From our station in Alpine, Texas, I monitor commercial vehicle crossings along one of the most remote and dangerous sections of the U.S.-Mexico border. Highway 118 cuts through some of the most desolate country in North America and desert wilderness, where radio signals fade, cell phone coverage disappears, and help can be hours away, even under the best circumstances. Rebecca had been hauling hazmat loads through our checkpoint for nearly 5 years. Professional, reliable, always carried proper documentation and maintained meticulous cargo records. She transported industrial chemicals from manufacturing plants in Houston to factories in northern Mexico, legitimate trade that required extensive permits, detailed manifests, and regular inspections by multiple agencies. The kind of cross-border commerce that keeps the legal economy functioning while we fight the illegal one. Her last radio transmission came through our monitoring station at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November of 2023. Rebecca was northbound on Highway 118, returning empty from a delivery in Chihuahua, scheduled to cross back into the United States at our Presidio checkpoint within 2 hours. Border Patrol Alpine. This is commercial vehicle operator Rebecca Martinez, requesting assistance with a possible customs violation I've observed. I responded immediately. Rebecca wasn't the type to file frivolous reports, and any customs violation in our sector was taken seriously, given the ongoing cartel activity in the region. Go ahead with your report, Rebecca. I'm northbound on Highway 118, about 15 miles south of the checkpoint. I've observed what appears to be unauthorized transfer of hazmat materials from a commercial vehicle to several smaller trucks. Transfer is taking place off-road, approximately 2 miles west of the highway. My blood went cold. Unauthorized hazmat transfers in the border region usually meant one thing: cartels stealing industrial chemicals for drug manufacturing operations. The kinds of operations that eliminated witnesses without hesitation. Rebecca, do not approach the scene. Continue directly to the checkpoint and we'll dispatch units to investigate. Copy that. I'm continuing north, but they may have spotted me. I can see vehicles moving in my direction from the transfer site. That was the last transmission we received from Rebecca Martinez. When Rebecca failed to arrive at the checkpoint, we launched an immediate search operation. Border Patrol agents, Texas Rangers, and DEA personnel combed Highway 118 from the Mexican border to the Presidio crossing, looking for any sign of Rebecca or her truck. We found her rig 18 hours later, parked in a remote arroyo, about 3 miles from where she'd reported the suspicious activity. But what we discovered challenged everything I understood about cartel operations in the border region. Rebecca's truck had been systematically dismantled with professional precision. Not the crude destruction you'd expect from criminals in a hurry, but careful, methodical disassembly that suggested intimate knowledge of commercial vehicle construction. The cab had been stripped of electronics, the chassis had been sectioned with cutting torches, and the trailer had been completely disassembled down to individual components. But Rebecca was nowhere to be found. This wasn't a standard hijacking, DEA agent Lisa Chen told me as we examined the scene. Cartels don't usually bother dismantling vehicles this completely. They steal the cargo and abandon the truck. This looks more like a professional vehicle disposal operation. The absence of tire tracks in the surrounding desert was equally disturbing. Despite the remote location and soft sand, we found no evidence of the vehicles Rebecca had reported seeing, no indication of how her cargo had been removed, and no tracks leading away from the dismantling site. It was as if Rebecca's truck had been disassembled by ghosts, who left no trace of their presence. The investigation revealed details that made the case even more troubling. Rebecca's cargo manifest showed she'd been hauling acetone, sulfuric acid, and several other industrial chemicals that, while legal for manufacturing purposes, were also essential components in methamphetamine production. Her load represented everything a cartel lab would need to manufacture millions of dollars worth of illegal drugs. Martinez stumbled onto something big. Agent Chen explained during our briefing. These weren't random thieves looking for fuel to steal. This was a sophisticated operation specifically targeting industrial chemical shipments. But the most disturbing discovery came when we analyzed communications intercepts from known cartel frequencies. DEA translators found multiple references to La Señora del Camión, the truck lady, and detailed discussions of chemical transport schedules that matched Rebecca's regular routes with uncanny accuracy. Someone's been feeding the cartels information about hazmat shipments, Chen told me. Route schedules, cargo manifests, border crossing times. They knew exactly what Rebecca was hauling and when she'd be vulnerable. The investigation that followed revealed a network of corruption that extended from trucking companies to border inspection facilities. Rebecca hadn't been the victim of random cartel violence. She'd been systematically targeted by criminals who knew her schedule better than she did. Security camera footage from truck stops along Rebecca's regular routes showed the same individuals repeatedly photographing her truck, documenting her cargo placards, and tracking her movement patterns. Someone had been studying Rebecca's operations for months, learning her habits and vulnerabilities in preparation for the perfect ambush. But the breakthrough came when Border Patrol agents found Rebecca's personal effects at a cartel lab 50 miles south of the border. Hidden among the drug manufacturing equipment were her driver's license, her hazmat certifications, and her company identification trophies that suggested she'd been specifically targeted rather than randomly victimized. They didn't just want her cargo, Agent Chen explained. They wanted to eliminate someone who could identify their chemical sourcing operations. Martinez had seen too much and become a liability. The investigation revealed that Rebecca had unknowingly witnessed several cartel chemical transfers during her regular border crossings. Her professional knowledge of hazmat transportation had allowed her to recognize illegal operations that other drivers might have missed, making her dangerous to criminals who depended on anonymity. Mexican authorities eventually raided the lab where Rebecca's belongings were found. But by then, the facility had been abandoned. The investigation suggested that Rebecca had been killed shortly after her final radio transmission, her body disposed of in ways that ensured it would never be recovered. Border cartels treat witnesses differently than they treat competitors, Chen told me during the final briefing. Competitors might be useful alive, but witnesses are only useful dead. Rebecca Martinez was posthumously awarded the Border Patrol Civilian Service Award for her attempt to report criminal activity, but the recognition couldn't undo the fundamental vulnerability that had killed her. Professional drivers hauling legitimate chemicals across the border had become targets for criminals who understood the value of their cargo better than they did. The case officially closed with the identification of several cartel operatives, but none of the individuals directly responsible for Rebecca's murder were ever apprehended. Her truck's dismantled remains were eventually recovered from a scrapyard in Juarez, but Rebecca herself remained missing. I still work border enforcement, still monitor commercial vehicle crossings, still coordinate with drivers who transport legitimate cargo through some of the most dangerous territory in North America. But I listen to radio transmissions differently now, knowing that every hazmat manifest represents not just regulated commerce, but a potential death warrant for the driver carrying it. Sometimes, during quiet night shifts, when cross-border traffic is light, I think about Rebecca's final transmission and wonder how many other drivers are out there right now carrying chemicals they don't realize are worth killing for. Professional operators just trying to do their jobs, unaware that their cargo makes them targets for people who've learned to see industrial transportation as a shopping list for murder. The signal Rebecca lost wasn't just radio contact. It was the connection between legal commerce and personal safety that allows civilization to function. Once that signal is lost, the line between legitimate business and lethal conspiracy becomes impossible to distinguish. And drivers like Rebecca become casualties in wars they never knew they were fighting. Anthony Deschamps drowned in his own truck cab in water that shouldn't have existed on any road he was authorized to travel. My name is Dr. Jennifer Torres, and I've been conducting environmental monitoring for Everglades National Park for 12 years. From our research station at Flamingo, I track water levels, pollution incidents, and ecosystem changes across 2.5 million acres of protected wetlands. When commercial vehicles are granted special access permits for scientific or infrastructure purposes, I'm responsible for ensuring their operations don't compromise the delicate balance of what remains America's most endangered natural ecosystem. Anthony had been transporting petroleum products through the park's restricted access roads for coastal energy services for 4 years. His permits were always in order, his environmental compliance record was spotless, and his routes were carefully planned to minimize ecological impact. The kind of professional operator who understood that hauling fuel through protected wilderness required extraordinary caution and respect for regulations that most drivers never encounter. That Tuesday morning in January of 2024 started with routine water quality monitoring along the network of service roads that provide emergency access to remote research stations. I was collecting samples from drainage channels near Highway 41 when my radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. Everglades Station. This is commercial vehicle operator Anthony Deschamps requesting assistance with navigation anomaly on restricted access Road 7. I knew Anthony's voice from previous radio contacts during his permitted transports, and he sounded confused rather than distressed. Road 7 was a well-maintained service route that connected Highway 41 to our water monitoring stations, a straight, clearly marked path that Anthony had traveled dozens of times without incident. Go ahead with your situation, Anthony. My GPS is showing an extra mile of road that doesn't appear on my permit maps. System indicates I should continue straight for another mile before reaching the turnaround point, but my documentation shows the road ending at the current location. I pulled out my tablet and checked the official road survey data. Road 7 was exactly 3.7 miles long, ending at a concrete turnaround facility beside the main monitoring station. There was no additional mile, no extension of the road beyond the documented endpoint. Anthony, your permit documentation is correct. Road 7 ends at mile marker 3.7. Do not proceed beyond the turnaround facility. Copy that, but the GPS is still showing additional roadway. I can actually see what appears to be a continuation of the pavement heading deeper into the wetlands. That was impossible. Road 7 had been surveyed and mapped multiple times over the past decade. I'd personally walked every foot of it during environmental impact assessments. There was no additional pavement, no continuation beyond the designated endpoint. Anthony, I need you to stop your vehicle immediately and wait for assistance. I'm heading to your location to investigate this navigation discrepancy. Roger. I'll hold position at what my permits show as the end of Road 7. I drove to the turnaround facility, expecting to find Anthony waiting beside his fuel tanker with a malfunctioning GPS unit. Instead, I found empty pavement and no sign that Anthony had ever been there. But I could see what he'd been describing. Beyond the official end of Road 7, a section of pavement continued into the wetlands, disappearing into a stand of cypress trees that shouldn't have been accessible by any vehicle. The road surface looked identical to the rest of the service route. Proper grading, regulation striping, even mile markers that appeared to be official Park Service installations. I called for backup and followed the phantom road on foot. About a quarter mile from the official turnaround, the pavement descended into standing water that gradually deepened until the road surface disappeared entirely beneath a swamp channel that was too deep to wade across. And there, submerged in 8 feet of dark water, I could see the outline of Anthony's truck. The recovery operation took 3 days and required specialized underwater equipment. When they finally raised Anthony's tanker from the swamp channel, the scene told a story that challenged everything I understood about environmental protection and human nature. Anthony had driven into a carefully constructed trap. Someone had built an extension to Road 7 using stolen construction materials and official Park Service markers, creating a fake route that led directly into a prepared drowning site. The road had been engineered to look completely legitimate, while guiding vehicles into water deep enough to ensure that drivers couldn't escape their cabs. This wasn't an accident, FBI agent Maria Santos told me, as we examined the submerged roadway. Someone spent months constructing this fake road extension, and they did it specifically to target fuel haulers with park access permits. The investigation revealed that Anthony was the fourth fuel transport driver to disappear in South Florida's protected wilderness areas over the past 2 years. Each incident had occurred on restricted access roads. Each involved GPS anomalies that suggested additional roadway beyond official survey data, and each resulted in drivers vanishing without explanation. But the most disturbing discovery was the motivation behind the killings. Environmental forensics revealed that the fake road extension had been constructed using materials stolen from legitimate park construction projects, and the drowning site had been carefully designed to create an artificial wetland that would eventually be absorbed into the natural ecosystem. "We're dealing with an eco-terrorist," Agent Santos explained. "Someone who believes that killing fuel haulers is justified environmental protection." The investigation eventually identified Dr. Michael Foster, a former Park Service ecologist who'd been dismissed for advocating violent action against commercial activities in protected areas. Foster had used his intimate knowledge of park infrastructure and environmental monitoring procedures to create killing sites that appeared to be natural features rather than crime scenes. He was trying to return the land to its natural state, Santos told me. In his mind, drowning fuel trucks in artificial wetlands was environmental restoration rather than murder. Foster's arrest revealed detailed plans for similar operations in other national parks, complete with target lists of drivers who held permits for restricted access routes. He'd been studying environmental monitoring data to predict when and where fuel transports would be most vulnerable to ambush. Foster believed he was protecting the ecosystem by eliminating petroleum contamination at its source, the FBI psychologist explained. He saw fuel haulers as invasive species that needed to be removed for the greater good of the environment. But Anthony Deschamps hadn't been an invasive species. He'd been a professional driver with environmental compliance training, someone who understood and respected the delicate balance of the ecosystems he traveled through. His death served no environmental purpose, except in the twisted ideology of someone who'd lost the ability to distinguish between conservation and murder. I still conduct water quality monitoring, still oversee commercial vehicle permits for restricted park access. But I survey the roads differently now, knowing that the landscape itself can be weaponized by those who understand its vulnerabilities better than those trying to protect it. Sometimes, during early morning sampling runs, when the swamp is quiet and the water reflects the sky like black glass, I think about Anthony's final moments and wonder how many other phantom miles are out there, built by people who've learned to turn environmental protection into environmental murder. Harold Peterson died during what he believed was a routine Department of Transportation safety inspection, but the inspector who killed him had been fired from the DOT 3 years earlier for falsifying compliance records. My name is Detective Amanda Walsh, and I've been investigating insurance fraud for Mutual Trucking Assurance for 10 years. From my office in Phoenix, I analyze suspicious death benefit claims, looking for patterns that suggest criminal activity rather than legitimate workplace accidents. When professional drivers die in circumstances that seem routine but result in unusually large insurance payouts, I'm the one who digs deeper to determine whether grief-stricken families are receiving rightful compensation or if someone has turned tragedy into profit. Harold had been driving fuel tankers across the Southwest for Mountain States Energy for 27 years. Exemplary safety record, never missed an inspection. The kind of veteran operator who treated DOT compliance as a matter of professional pride. His route to the Grand Canyon North Rim was seasonal work, delivering fuel for the lodge facilities before winter weather closed Highway 67 for 6 months. Dangerous work that required special permits and extreme caution on mountain roads that became impassable at the first heavy snowfall. The insurance claim that landed on my desk seemed straightforward enough. Harold had died during a routine DOT inspection at a pullout near the Grand Canyon North Rim, apparently from a heart attack brought on by stress from an unexpected compliance check. His employer filed for the standard death benefit, plus an additional policy Harold had purchased specifically for high-risk seasonal routes. Total payout, $450,000. But something about the timing bothered me. Harold's medical records showed no history of heart problems, and drivers don't usually suffer fatal stress reactions to routine inspections unless something else is seriously wrong. I decided to review the DOT inspection report that had supposedly triggered his fatal medical episode. That's when I discovered the first anomaly. There was no official DOT inspection scheduled for that location or date. According to the Department of Transportation's database, no inspector had been assigned to Highway 67 during Harold's final run, and no compliance check had been authorized for the remote pullout where his body was found. I contacted the Arizona DOT to verify the inspection report, but their response was immediate and troubling. The inspector identification number on Harold's paperwork belonged to someone who no longer worked for the department. The credentials were fake, the inspection was unauthorized, and Harold had died during an encounter with someone impersonating a federal safety officer. We haven't had an Inspector Williams in our department since 2021. DOT Supervisor Janet Martinez told me over the phone. Richard Williams was terminated for falsifying inspection records and selling fraudulent compliance certificates. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Harold hadn't died from inspection stress. He'd been murdered by someone using fake DOT credentials to gain access to isolated commercial vehicles. But the question that kept me awake that night was simpler and more disturbing. Why? I spent the next week analyzing similar insurance claims from across the Southwest, looking for other suspicious deaths involving DOT inspections. What I found was a pattern of systematic fraud that had been hidden in plain sight for nearly 2 years. 7 commercial drivers had died during routine DOT inspections in remote locations across Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. All had been discovered alone at isolated pullouts. All had died from apparent medical emergencies during compliance checks. And all had resulted in substantial insurance payouts to beneficiaries who'd never heard of the policies that were paying out in their names. Someone's been taking out life insurance policies on commercial drivers without their knowledge. I explained to my supervisor during an emergency briefing, using stolen personal information to purchase coverage, then murdering the drivers to collect the benefits. The investigation revealed that Richard Williams had been using his former DOT credentials and knowledge of inspection procedures to conduct elaborate insurance fraud murders. He'd been targeting drivers on remote routes, using fake inspection stops to isolate his victims, then killing them in ways that looked like natural deaths brought on by the stress of compliance violations. But the most chilling aspect of Williams's operation was his victim selection process. He'd been studying commercial vehicle safety databases, identifying drivers with clean records who traveled isolated routes and had sufficient personal information available through public records to facilitate identity theft. Harold and the others had been selected not for personal reasons, but because their professional profiles made them ideal targets for insurance fraud. Williams had turned DOT inspection procedures into a murder weapon. FBI agent Lisa Santos explained during our joint investigation briefing. He knew exactly what to say, what paperwork to show, and how to convince drivers to cooperate with inspections that would kill them. The breakthrough came when we found Williams's storage unit in Flagstaff, filled with fake DOT equipment, falsified inspection documents, and detailed files on dozens of commercial drivers across the region. He'd been maintaining surveillance on potential victims for months, learning their routes, schedules, and personal information before selecting them for murder. Most disturbing were the insurance policy applications, all filled out in Williams's handwriting, but bearing forged signatures from his victims. Harold's policy had been purchased 6 weeks before his death, with Williams listed as the sole beneficiary under a fake identity. The other murdered drivers had similar policies, all purchased shortly before their deaths, and all paying out to Williams under various assumed names. He was treating professional drivers like inventory, Agent Santos told me, studying their value as insurance targets, then harvesting them when conditions were optimal for collecting benefits. Williams was arrested at a truck stop outside Las Vegas, preparing to conduct another inspection on a fuel hauler who matched his victim profile. When they searched his fake DOT vehicle, investigators found detailed inspection checklists, falsified compliance equipment, and enough documentation to convince any professional driver that he was a legitimate federal safety officer. During his confession, Williams showed no remorse for the drivers he'd murdered, describing them as business opportunities rather than human beings. He'd perverted his knowledge of transportation safety regulations into a systematic method for identifying and killing people whose deaths would generate profit. They were just names on insurance policies, Williams told investigators. Professional drivers die in accidents all the time. I just made sure the right accidents happened to the right people at the right times. Harold Peterson's final inspection had been conducted by someone who understood DOT procedures better than most legitimate inspectors, but who'd used that expertise to facilitate murder rather than ensure safety. His death served no transportation safety purpose except to generate insurance payments for someone who'd learned to see professional drivers as walking death benefits. Williams received 7 life sentences without possibility of parole, but his conviction couldn't undo the fundamental damage he'd done to the trust between drivers and safety inspectors. His crimes had corrupted the very relationship that keeps commercial transportation safe, the cooperation between professional operators and regulatory officials. I still investigate insurance fraud, but I examine DOT-related death claims with different eyes now, knowing that the safety inspections meant to protect drivers can be weaponized by those who understand the system's vulnerabilities. Every routine compliance check, every roadside inspection, every interaction between drivers and regulatory officials represents a moment of trust that can be exploited by predators, wearing the right uniforms and carrying the right credentials. Sometimes, during late-night case reviews, when the office is quiet, I think about Harold's final moments and wonder how many other fake inspectors are out there right now, using badges and clipboards to murder people who are just trying to follow the rules that are supposed to keep them safe.